1984.
Hello, all the world. The things that keep me up at night are the following: the difference between finance and industry, and also the center right. All information presented in video comes from a neutralized and vaporized source. You will enjoy watching this video almost as much as you will enjoy reading the Kaiser's memoirs. Finance versus industry. You may have seen that for some reason, cities are more influential today than they were in 1139 AD. Instead of power being held in the countryside with the nobles and their castles, it accumulates in population centers. According to Spengler's book, 1984, this is mostly a natural change that happens in every late-stage civilization. Babylon for Mesopotamia, Rome for the Apollonians, and Istanbul for the Magians. New York, Los Angeles, and London have both enormous cultural and financial dominance in the Faustian world, which has technically been dead since 2001 according to Spengler. In a basic sense, this may help explain why there has been a liberal drift across all countries in the West. Dense urban areas not only tend to be liberal, rootless, and metropolitan, but they usually are centers of finance. Financiers are international in nature, so they have a liberal disposition. Capital is easier to move than industry, and farmland literally cannot move. Industrialists and landed nobility have a nationalist disposition. Free movement of labor and capital hurts native industries, so they have a vested interest in protectionism. Of course, industrialists willingly move their industry overseas. However, there was a push by the government for that to happen. When Nixon visited China in 1972, America's intention was to pull China away from the Soviet Union, thereby taking away a powerful ally. However, there is no such thing as a one-way relationship. What China got out of this partnership was the industry of America's empire. Both conservatives and liberals believed at the time that industrializing China would make it a happy, gay democracy. In reality, they've created a monster in the CCP. Couple that with the fact that a lot of industry was moved without the consent of non-metropolitan Canadians who now found themselves unemployed and drug-addled. You get the idea that the industrial shift was an effort made by disconnected managers and not the middle class who actually maintained and worked in manufacturing. On a less basic and more complex sense of this video, it's not to say that if industry had stayed here, Canada would be less paused. However, landed nobility and industrialists are way more friendly to tradition than international financiers are. China, despite being communist, now has deeply nationalist leadership. You could see this as a natural consequence of China's economy being in large part industrial. The ocean facilitates easy commerce, so seafaring, marine, merchant sea powers tend to be more liberal, ruthless, and international than land powers. Britain was evidently more liberal than a German empire in 1914, and compared to France and Britain, Germany still had a considerable amount of its workforce in agriculture. As a matter of fact, the development of the German economy from 1870 to 1914 was driven primarily by its manufacturing. By the time of the Great War, it was the third largest economy in the world, behind America and Britain, but it was the largest commodity producer in Europe. They were a monarchy, nationalist, Christian, and a great power. The Kaiser was so scary to bankers that they decided to throw away the lives of 20 million people in the Great War. The landowning nobility of the empire, known as Junkers, fought against the liberalization of the economy with limited success. A famous Junker you might have heard of is Otto von Bismarck. He was so reactionary, he tried to implement a law that would denaturalize social democrats. This law is so good, it should be on the platform of any self-respecting conservative party in the 21st century. He was fired by Wilhelm for that. The Junker estates were entirely dissolved after World War II by Soviet land redistribution. The subsequent famine predictably followed in East Germany, but the communist relationship to petit bourgeois landowners, otherwise kulaks, is interesting. Lenin said that middle-class farmers will always reproduce feudal relationships with those who work their land, a relationship that is traditional in nature and therefore a threat to the revolution. On a metaphysical, non-basic, experimental sense, to put this into perspective, Canada has been hollowed out. Not only do we not produce widgets, we do not have the capacity to produce widgets. Moreover, farming in general is no longer a family business like the Junkers. However, a lot of family farms still exists in Saskatchewan. Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, says that farming is an activity heavily subsidized by the government. In the EU, agriculture was funded to such an extent that farmers in Finland were growing sugarcane for a state-subsidized profit. Pro tip, you can't really grow sugarcane in Finland. If you are wondering why farmers aren't fanatic, conservative agitators, conventional wisdom teaches don't bite the hand that feeds. When Ontario suggested cutting back on state handouts in 2005, the Kulaks organized mass protest convoys and rallied in Toronto. The government yielded. But further, adding insult to injury, farmers aren't very good politicians. Wilhelm II said it best, quote, "The Conservative Party, honorable and faithful to its king, unfortunately has not always produced leaders of superior endowments who were at the same time skillful, tactically trained politicians. The agrarian wing was at times too strongly marked and was a burden to the party." Page 33, The Kaiser's Memoirs. Too long didn't watch. Power that is dangerous to parasites is farming and manufacturing. Landed gentry are natural monarchists. Henry Ford was an anti-Semite. If you want to end democracy, start a farm, then buy more farms, become neo-Junkers. But effectively, that'll never happen because there will need to be a systemic, top-down change to the law and how the economy is structured. In other words, BlackRock dictates who gets to succeed. We live in a command economy. An excellent example of how managerial control is wrested away from original founders is the Ford Foundation. It has $12.4 billion in assets and funds literally every major paused cause in the world. No one owns it. It is just a vehicle, a juggernaut for pause.
What the fuck you doing in Alberta? You fucking traitorous fucking bitch! Get the fuck out of this province!
You don't belong here.
You're a fucking traitor! You fucking bitch!
No more good editing. A lot has been made on the right from the election of Pierre Poilievre to head of the Conservative Party. Of course, you shouldn't follow federal politics very closely because it will give you brain damage.
Vaginas and vulvas are a source of strength, empowerment, and pleasure. Yet throughout our lives, we've been taught that the terms vulva and vagina do not have a place in polite conversation. That's one more way that the bodies of over half the world's population are stigmatized, sexualized, and objectified.
However, I already have brain damage. Pierre will win a tremendous and terrific landslide victory in the next election. Probably. If he doesn't win in 2025, I will eat my drop ceiling. In any case, a CPC majority will be harmful for us in the long term. All organizations have conservatives or traditionalists in the sense that they have people who want to maintain or stick to the old ways of doing things. This can be anything from a chess club to the Soviet Union, where during the reign of Brezhnev, Stalinists would have been considered traditional conservatives. Our beloved Zog has tradcons too. Andrew Scheer is an old guard liberal. He says, "Return to the 2000s. While Pierre is an ultra-reactionary bulldog, he says, "Return to the 1990s. Do you see the problem here? They are not offering the radical change necessary to completely rid Canada of Enlightenment thinking, or to use a more modern term, woke moralists. All of these so-called far-right populist blowhards compromise on every issue so they can be accepted by a tremendously hostile and shockingly Zionist occupation regime. They'll transform into rabid, mentally impaired, Zionistly disabled types as soon as they are told to be by Daily Wire. Pierre is no different. He would send the cream of our youth to die in the Middle East in a World War I type scenario. But chillax, bro. I guess he will reduce immigration by 50,000 in 4 years? A Zog Tradcon takeover is the only scenario where we lose 100% of the time. Pierre will not lead this country into ruin through unsustainable programs, and he will give red meat to the conservative base. The perfidious BoomerCon will breathe a sigh of relief when wokesters get destroyed with facts and logic in the House of Commons while nothing meaningful actually changes. Note, this is good enough for the majority of people. Democracy is inherently evil and will lead to evil, as we all know to be true. By relieving the pressure the radical left was putting on the bland and mentally deficient moderate, the conservatives will give the occupation government time to readjust, refocus, and ultimately tighten its grip in the face of a growing wave of dissent. In order to demonstrate exactly what I mean, I made this graph. In the top right corner is hell. The x-axis is time. The y-axis signifies woke moralists. This line, starting from the bottom left, is the highway to hell. You can see it starts in 1776. A conservative victory is a small bump, then we continue down the highway just a little slower. A left-wing victory means that we keep pursuing their self-destructive line of action, particularly regarding Russia, and there will almost certainly be some kind of event. If that's the case, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what will happen. Monarchists replacing the center-right means avoiding total defeat because the only faction capable of stabilizing the Zog will have passed away, and there is the possibility of assuming control peacefully. Of course, this is not advocating for accelerationism. Accelerationism is actively aiding the left to purposefully cause a so-called collapse. Fighting against the center is markedly different. It is simply to destroy the CPC and build a viable monarchist right-wing movement. The question often comes up of whether dissidents should go to university at all, or if everyone should just go to trade schools. The answer is, very straightforwardly, both. There is a lot that goes into building a vanguard party. One needs trained managers, bureaucrats, advertising specialists, people who know how to install drop ceilings, and most importantly, lots of connections. Not only that, but consider other areas where the left dominates, like history. For example, medieval times weren't nearly as bad as they are portrayed to be, but for the convenience of the left, who wants people to have a natural aversion to monarchy, that is how their propagandists who call themselves historians portray the Middle Ages. But not everyone wants to be or can be an intellectual, so trade school is also a good option. Of course, all this is wishful thinking. As the state becomes increasingly like George Orwell's 1948 Britain, the possibility of building any organization able to counter anything becomes non-existent unless it's completely underground, like the Polish Solidarity Trade Union. I am not advocating anything. I am just saying that a vanguard party needs people with talent and connections. Universities, even as bad as they are now, are one of the few places that can provide that. What can be said, however, is that the People's Party under Mad Max is the only viable counterparty, so you should support them in any way you feel comfortable with, thank you. Unless, maybe in 30 years, there will be a monarchist vanguard party inspired by me you can aid. That's never gonna happen, fingers crossed. Works cited: The Kaiser's Memoirs and Basic Economics and 1984. Basically, a look at these polls I did on the Fediverse, specifically on the instance known as Post. If you join Post, you can vote in these polls too, like a good internet citizen. These polls were done on nothing in particular and don't matter. And also, follow me. This channel could be banned by YouTube without warning or notice, so follow me on Post, Odyssey, and Gab. They all transform into They all transform into fuck.